Okay, it's open now and no one's showing up.
All right, great. I am convening the regular bi-monthly meeting of the Board of Directors of Marine Water for August 3rd, 2021. Our first order of business is to call the roll.
Director Bragman.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Russell.
Here.
And President Kohler.
I'm here. And now I just need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Here's money right now.
Oh, great.
I'll make the motion to adopt.
Second.
You know, I think I should have seen this, Molly. I didn't realize we had so many closed session items. I think that's going to really limit our time to do what we need to do to finish out the review.
I was going to let the board know that the first item should be extremely quick.
Okay.
And if we don't make it to the third item, it's not imperative that that happened. So the board can take whatever time it feels necessary and doesn't need to worry about that.
Okay. It's just, we've just delayed this so long. I just really want to get this done.
Understood. And we do have one public participant, so I don't know if they would have a comment to where we were with our process.
Where we were is we have a motion and a second on adopting the agenda. Is there a public comment on the agenda?
Not on the agenda.
Do we have, okay, well, we haven't gotten anything else yet. So right now we just need a roll call vote on the agenda.
Yes. Director Fragman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Excuse me, Director Russell.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. Okay, we are now actually not taking public comment because we are adjourning into closed session, and we will take public comment when we resume at 7:30.
Yep, you on the other link.
Perfect.
Okay.
Start.
All right, we are reconvening the regular meeting of the Marin Municipal Board of Directors for August 3rd, 2021. We are reconvening after closed session, and there is no reportable action to report. This is now the time for public comment on any item that is not on the agenda. Terry, do we have any public comments?
Yes, we do. We have several. The first speaker I have is Steve Isaacs, and then after him, I have Sydney Park. So Mr. Isaacs. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes, sir.
Good. Hello, everyone. I'm a resident of Greenberry, been a resident for 50 years. And I've been very critical of you folks and your strategic planning to date. And I would like to ask you a planning issue or a planning question relative to our current situation. And that is based on the 2010 proposition to build a desal plant in the county requires a vote by the citizens of the county. What is your plan for putting such a ballot item in front of the electorate?
So, sir, we're not allowed to engage with you on an item that's not agendized, although I think that does relate to item 5, the drought update. So I'm going to ask Ben if he would be willing to answer your question when we get to that item on the agenda.
That sounds good, President Kohler.
Okay. And the next commentary?
Miss Sydney Park.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I just want to thank you. My husband Neil and I are up in British Columbia right now, where our grass is as yellow as it is in Kentfield. And I want to thank you for making these meetings available to us on Zoom. So while we're here, we can see what's going on at home.
Thank you.
The next, yes, I have 2 more, Baron Hamill and Deli Woodring. Ms. Hamill.
Good evening, and thank you again for listening to my comments. Effectively managing what water is still available is the work that needs to be done now, not waiting until there's nothing left to manage. We know the trajectory of when there will be nothing left in our reservoirs, and it's not that far off. So let's look at water management from the perspective of the low-hanging fruit. What's easy to manage with limited deleterious side effects to the general public. Yes, I'm talking about golf courses again, and their use of potable water to irrigate greens and tees. I'd venture to say that if you pencil it out, the water used in just one day to maintain the greens on just one golf course would be enough to provide an average household of 4 people with enough water for 3 or more months. If the people who play golf have a choice between playing one round now on green grass or their family having any water at all next summer, which do you think a rational person would choose? Given that you are the governing body that in the tough times will be making the decisions about who has water and who doesn't, my question is this: why are you waiting until it's a dire emergency to make these decisions? Where's the logic in your sense of planning for a future that will be in deeper crisis? That you're choosing the discretionary needs of less than, I'm guessing here, approximately 400 people a day versus the mandatory needs of 191,000 people is difficult for me to comprehend. Or to put it another way, one that applies statistics. One golf course is using 7,200,000 gallons of potable water per year, more than 22 acre feet. Multiply that by several golf courses, and it's probably closer to 100 acre feet of potable and raw water per year. That's 32.5 million gallons of water. Can we really afford this discretionary expenditure? Yes, urging people to save 40% of their household water usage is necessary, but it has to be viewed against the potable water consumed by golf courses. Otherwise, the disparity in the message is difficult for the public to accept. When there's no water left in our reservoirs and a limited amount of it will be piped in at great expense to the public, will you be able to look back at this moment and say to yourself that in all good conscience, the right decisions were being made when there was a chance to make them? I repeat, we know the trajectory of when there will be nothing left in our reservoirs. And while what little water remains is being used on some things that people consider a low priority, not enough is being saved today to prepare for tomorrow. Later, there will be no going back in time to reverse decisions that should have been made today. I appeal to your good judgment. Do the right thing now for the majority rather than protecting the privilege of a few. I appreciate your response. Thank you.
So I'm going to remind you again. So thank you for the comment. I just want to remind you again that we're really not allowed to respond at this time because these are unagendized items. But Carrie, when we get to the drought update, I know we've had a lot of conversations about golf courses. So if you've got information that you can share at this time, otherwise this has come up a lot. So we really do need to respond with some fairly detailed information about how we're addressing that issue.
I have a question related to this, which is the variance that was negotiated with the golf course operators, whether that's a formal document, and if it is, if it could be circulated to the board to take a look. Is that a possibility? You're muted, Ben.
Ben, you're muted.
Yes, we'll pull it together and share that information.
Okay, I'd appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
And again, if we could just talk more about that at that agenda item, that'd be great. Any more comments in this?
Yes, Deli Woodring and then perhaps Gia Carter. So Deli, please.
Hi, my name is Deli. My husband and I have lived on the Tiburon Peninsula for quite a while, and before that in Central Marin. I do have one question. As we're nearing the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, how can we be sure that our drinking water is safe? And I don't know if you're able to answer that, but it's a question that has arisen in discussions lately. Thank you.
So again, I'm so sorry to keep repeating myself. We're not allowed to respond in this item, and these are for non-agendized items, but I think we may be able to squeeze that in on a later agenda item. And if not, I'm sure the staff will be happy to connect with you offline if you want to provide your contact information to Terry.
Next, Rhea Carter.
Hi, thank you for listening. My husband and I just purchased a home at 740 Bolinas Road, which is adjacent to what I understand is land trust land, and it is our property is actually on Old Mountain Tunnel Road. And we just purchased this house a couple of months ago, and one of the main reasons was access to amazing hiking trails, which were right at our front door, turning left on Old Mountain Tunnel Road. And a couple, I guess maybe a week ago, some orange fence was put across the road, blocking our access to the trailhead. Although we can walk up to Bolinas Road and probably hike down, walk down Bolinas Road for a quarter of a mile, it's very unsafe to do so because the road is very twisty and turny with blind turns, and there's both autos and cyclists on that road. And we were told after I called the water department that a neighbor had cited a safety issue of it's actually a bridge that's been cordoned off. And my concern is that our safety hiking with our access to hiking trails is compromised by walking on Bolinas Road, which adds now pedestrian traffic and walking with dogs and such. And I was wondering, if we could be informed of what the safety issues are of the bridge, and we proposed that it would be in benefit of ourselves and also our neighbors and cyclists that come through to have an easement on that bridge, so that we would be able to still access the trails safely. And I don't understand what the safety issue is. I'd like to know a little bit more about what the safety. I'm sure that the bridge is not safe for cars or trucks to pass, but it seems very secure for pedestrians.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So once again, we can't engage with you on that right now, but Ben, if I could ask you to have somebody maybe follow up with the speaker.
Yes, we'll
I was just going to say, Ben and I have exchanged email about that. So there is information we can provide. So.
Great.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
And last speaker, James Krajewski, please.
Hi, thank you. Once again, I would like to make a plea for transparency about where our water is going, who is using our water. I found it fascinating that the operations committee meeting that someone mentioned that hundreds of thousands of gallons a day were going to water to golf courses, and something about San Quentin being the largest water user in Marin County, which I found difficult to believe. But searching through the website, it's nearly impossible to find out who is actually using the water or what categories of water use there are. For example, business, personal, or landscaping, or homeowners, or whatever. So without that information, I don't know how anybody can make decisions about cutting back on water use. So again, transparency, this is a public entity that should be public with the information about who all is using our water. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Are there any more public comments, Terry?
There are none.
Okay, we're going to move on to directors and general managers announcements. Ben, do you have anything?
I do have a brief item I wanted to share with the board that you may have read. There's been increase in water theft throughout California, and just noting that we had a recent incident where staff discovered an unauthorized hydrant connection leading to a private property, and it was kind of a significant issue, and we filed a report with the county sheriff department, who are investigating, and it may be referred to the district attorney's office for further action. Preliminarily, we're looking kind of in the range of potential use or theft of water of around 500,000 to 3+ million gallons. And, I'm sharing this, not just this incident, but that we are working to be alert as the drought deepens and folks are impacted to ensure, we're doing our best that this doesn't spread or continue.
Wow. Okay. Thanks. Director's announcements. Anybody?
I've just got some news. I was walking through Marin Stables, which is actually part of our watershed, is owned by Marin Municipal Water District. And the manager, Jim McDermott, told me they actually cut their water bill, their water use in half. And as he put it, necessity is the mother of invention. And what they did is in the ring, instead of watering it every day, they got a product called Dust Off, which is sort of a silica product. It's actually, I think, made here in the Bay Area. And they have cut they've cut their water use in half. So there's some good things happening out there in spite of the kind of the pressure we're under. There are a lot of people like Byrne and others that have called in that are really sort of applying their creativity to deal with the conditions. So I just thought I'd mention that to the board as sort of a good news item for a change. And I'll leave it at that. So.
Thank you. Other board comments? Jack, Larry,
I have none.
Monty? And none for me. So let's move on to the consent calendar. I'm looking for an approval motion.
Move
So
approval
moved.
of the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, do we have any public comment on approval of the consent calendar?
There are none.
Okay, then we need a roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. That moves us to item 5, the drought update.
Okay, good evening, board of directors. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Good evening, Lucy Croy, Water Quality Manager. We're going to go through an update on drought efforts over the past month or so. So starting off tonight, we're going to give an update on water supply conditions and water use over the past few weeks. We'll touch on drought activities and conservation outreach, and then end with an update on the development of water transfers. So starting with water supply and water use, our total reservoir storage as going into August is just above 32,000 acre feet. This is 41%, just above 41% of our total system capacity. Our average is for this time of year is around 63,000 acre feet. You can see this dark line right around here. So right now for this time of year going into August, we're about half. We're just sitting around 50%, 51% of our normal for this time of year. And as I've mentioned before, this is really historic for us. Over the last 40 years, we really haven't been this low in total reservoir storage going into August and the fall months, really since the early 80s when we raised Kent Dam and built Fuhuli Reservoir. So moving into water use over the past few weeks. Since May, we've really seen water use stay pretty stable, around 23, 24 million gallons per day. Typically going into the hot summer months, we typically see demand spike quite a bit to around 30, 31 million gallons per day, as you can see on this orange line up here. So week over week, we're seeing about a 24% decrease in water use. Moving into August, we're about halfway through this peak irrigation season and starting to really lose this opportunity for considerable water savings as that irrigation window starts to narrow quite a bit going into the fall winter, and use kind of transitions more to indoor use. as you can see later down in December. And we've seen through past historic droughts that it does take quite a bit of time for behavior to change. So we're continuing to push out messaging around the drought and conservation efforts. And you'll hear quite a bit more later in the presentation tonight. And then moving into our projections of reservoir storage. You've seen this chart a few times now. Our actual reservoir storage shown here on the left in dark black, and then moving into projections on the dashed. So three projections, the dashed lines being 25, 50, and average rainfall, given our historic rainfall runoff that we've seen over the past 100 years or so. And then in the solid line, just above the blue and in the green, we've shown really the considerable impact that achieving the 40% conservation savings would have on our reservoir storage going into the next 6 to 18 months. So going into next, say we were to achieve 40% savings through next May or June, we'd get more than 6,000 to 7,000 acre feet in savings. And this is really just showing the impact that conservation can have on our storage and really how central that is to our efforts right now around the drought. So moving into the activities and outreach underway. First, as I've mentioned, is really conservation, and that's our priority, is reaching out to our customers and making sure that they understand not only about the drought and severity, but also what tools are available and what rebates we have for them. Additionally, we're trying to access as much of our local water supply as we have. So using Fuhuli Reservoir, a reservoir that we only have used typically in pretty severe droughts before. So as of the beginning of August, since May, so over the past 2 or 3 months, we've used about 1,500 acre feet, pumped that over to Nicasio and using that in the system. And we expect to use that for another 10 days or so. And then at that point, we would cease operations and return the rental generator. The other initiative that we've been working on is developing a residential recycled water fill station. This has been fully constructed, and this will be a station just near the Civic Center for customers in our service area, or all of Marin County really, to come pick up recycled water for free for irrigation and for watering their plants. So at this point, everything is fully built, and we are just waiting for the final go-ahead on permitting, and we're expecting that will come through pretty much any day now. So then moving on to the next, I'm going to hand off to Emma Detweiler, our communications specialist, and she's going to give an update on communications outreach.
Thank you, Lucy. Hi, everyone. Emma Detweiler, communications specialist. So we have continued to schedule presentations for city councils, HOAs, chambers, rotaries, and other groups. We have spoken to nearly 50 groups to date, and we have a number of upcoming presentations scheduled. These have been going over really well with the various stakeholder groups. They provided us with an opportunity to reach our customers at a grassroots level. We've actually been asked to return and provide updates to many of these groups as the drought conditions have continued and we have new water restrictions in place. And to continue to expand these presentations and continue to reach new groups, we recently added the ability for customers and groups, stakeholder groups, to request presentations through our website. So we have been focusing heavily on our outreach, our rebates program outreach. We recently mailed this rebates focused postcard to our entire service area. So that's including those who do not receive a water bill, like renters. The postcard features our lawn replacement incentive programs, our gray water rebate kit, and the Flume device discount. The mailer also mentions that we have rebate programs beyond these that are highlighted and points people to our website for additional information. So in addition to this postcard mailer, we also produced a special rebate edition e-newsletter, and this was sent to over 25,000 email addresses. The e-news included all available rebate programs, and it linked directly to the rebate program applications on our website. So taking a look ahead at some upcoming projects and some of our projects that are underway, we are filming the water conservation video PSA this week. We are launching a webinar series for landscape professionals next week, and we'll be following that with a webinar series for residential customers. We have a contract in place for a focus group project, and we are currently refining the questions. We expect to have that underway within the next few weeks. And finally, following the success of the Drought Drive Up event, we have scheduled a second event to be held on Saturday, August 21st at the Marin Water offices. And I will pass this to Carrie, but happy to take any questions.
Before you move on, one quick question. You know, a couple people, so I just want to congratulate you. Can you go back to the slide that shows the mailer you sent out? Because I did get a number of people reached out to me to tell me, you know, that they thought it was really useful. They put it on the refrigerator. And I happened to say offhand, you know, they were asking, you know, why we were focusing on these particular things. And I just started with, well, we know that we use about 50% of our water outside. And the person stopped me and said, nobody knows that. And I thought that was fascinating. They're like, why didn't you lead with that in the brochure? Now, granted, everybody thinks they're a messaging expert. So, you know, I'm not criticizing, but it did strike me that it was an interesting thing that we may want to highlight more clearly, that part of the reason we're so focused on these rebates that are really geared to bringing down our consumption of potable water outside. I'm not sure how many people do know that. So either in our next, you know, round of outreach or on the website, I think this goes to one of the comments that was made during the open session. I think people are not truly aware of where their water is going. And that really might be another communications and outreach opportunity for us. So, you know, I'm just going to recommend that you guys consider that.
Certainly. Thank you.
All right, I have the next section, Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager, and I'll provide the conservation update. Starting with contacts with customers. So we have mobilized an internal team to address water waste. As you can see from the numbers here for the month of July, there's a significant increase in water waste reports that are coming into the district through door tags, meaning patrols from district staff, online reporting, and then also through our phone hotline. We continue to track the conservation calls as well. And you can see there's a slight decrease. What we've actually done is split our water waste hotline and our conservation hotline to allow for a more focused and timely response to both of those inquiries. So I think that we'll continue to see those numbers kind of level out, although I think water waste will continue to grow in the coming months. Another reason why we might see a decrease in the conservation and calls and emails is that our website continues to be more robust and provide more appropriate information that customers can more easily find exactly what they're looking for, and it doesn't warrant a phone call or an email. So we'll continue to track those though as well. Looking at drought program participation, we've had a comparison here for the month of June, and then also a total for the month of July as well. You can see that for our turf program, particularly, we continue to see a spike and an increase in participation. I think we can recognize that we continue to see robust participation across all of our programs, which is great. It means that customers are hearing our message and our call to action and taking advantage of the incentive programs that we've developed. The graph on the right-hand side shows the applications that we've received to date for our turf removal programs. And maybe Lucy can point to the spike increase for the last 2 weeks or so. That's when Emma mentioned that e-news went out. We had about 30 participants sign up in a matter of days, bringing our total to over 320 current applicants within the program. So we continue to see, again, robust participation in these programs. Slide. Looking at a landscape area measurement statistic. So I've mentioned to the board at prior meetings that we've been doing some work around measuring Landscapes to get parcel-specific landscape measurements. We have some, our data is finally in. It's no longer preliminary, it's been finalized. And so I wanted to share some of these statistics with the board and the public. For our residential turf grass within the service area, we have a final number of 38.4 million square feet, which equates to 881 acres. So again, this does not include commercial, but it does include homeowners associations and multifamily services. The prior figure that had been presented was preliminary, and this is going to be the number we move forward with, the 38.4. When we look at the district-wide statistics, we found that 79% of the sites within our service area have turf grass within them, which just goes to show that there's a high level of opportunity for us to encourage customers to participate in our programs to really reduce that peak demand. We took the data that we received and we broke it down into subsectors. So we looked at the top 2,000 parcels to get an idea of which types of areas and which locations have the highest square footage of turf on them. When we looked at those 2,000 parcels, 95 of them were HOAs. Looking at common areas, you can see the range there from just over 3,000 square feet up to 75,000 square feet on an HOA, which may seem, fairly reasonable depending on the size of the HOA. Although definitely an opportunity to reduce some of that. I'm sure some of it would be considered non-functional. We look at 87 sites within this 2,000 that are multifamily residential, similar to the HOA, but really narrowing in on these 1,818 single-family residents. The fact that we have at least one location within our service area that has almost 80,000 square feet just goes to show that what the opportunity is to really reduce some of that turf within our service area to make it to ensure that it's fully utilized and appropriate. There was a comment up front during the public comment period around golf courses. I will just note that 3 golf courses within our service area, so Meadow Club, Peacock Gap, and the City of Mill Valley, have pursued an alternative means of compliance for the current restrictions that we have in place. There is a formal documentation, and they do report to us either monthly or bi-monthly, depending on what their billing period is. And so we do collect that information, and we will be sure to share that with the board, and we'll compile that for all of you. And with that, I will turn it over to Paul Sellier, Director of Operations, for the next section.
Hey, Carrie, before we go forward, do you have, as part of this is really fascinating analysis, do you have any statistics on non-functional turf? Looking at obviously I'm referencing a term that was used by Las Vegas in their recent move to ban, or Southern Nevada Water Authority to ban non-functional turf. Do we have any similar statistics on how much non-functional turf we have in the district?
We don't at this time, but not to say that can't be determined once it's defined, right? So we would need to have a clear definition of what is considered non-functional turf so that we can kind of refine and do some analysis around where we would locate that within the service area. I will note, maybe Lucy, go back to one slide to or maybe two, one more. That this tiny little grass area, so I'm trying to use my pointer, but it won't work. That tiny little area, that's probably 3 feet by 3 feet, that's causing all of that runoff, would certainly be considered non-functional turf, potentially, right? Although it's in a residential sector, right? So I think there's very small areas that could target that probably do waste a lot of water, and then really large areas that we can get significant water savings. But that will be something that we'll definitely want to pursue and look further into. I would just want to also note that this data we just received is only for residential sector, right? So residential, HOA, and multifamily customers. And so as we progress looking at the commercial sites, I think will be more of an opportunity for us to really narrow in and help us define what non-functional turf we might be able to target.
Could we just use, maybe just something to make it easy, is just use the same definition as Southern Nevada Water Authority used? Obviously, they gave that a lot of thought. It would just to give us a sense of the order of magnitude of how much of that non-functional turf, landscaping in front of businesses and things like that, in medians and so forth, that they're not tied to residents, or playing fields and things like that?
Yeah, I think we could. I think that as we continue to collect this data, I was thrilled to get it before the board meeting tonight. So we're still kind of diving into what it is and the various ways that we can utilize it. We'll also, I didn't mention this, but we'll also use this top 2,000 parcel data for our the survey, the focus group that Emma mentioned, right? So teeing up high water users and the sites with high percentage of turf grass to target for that survey as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Good evening, members of the board. Paul Sellier, Operations Director. I don't have any satellite photographs to show you tonight or anything that fancy. I have pencils and paper. We're going to do some math this evening. But before we get to that, we're going to do a quick summary of our drought projects. And I do want to note, right, and that there is some significant work that's been done and is ongoing. Namely, of course, conservation, some of which you've heard tonight, as our top priority. And we continue to improve and refine and enhance that, even with satellite technology. And we are working with Sonoma Water, collaborating on any and all opportunities to address the drought. And we have, of course, taken on some recycled water opportunities, namely the residential fill station, which will be opening soon. I saw emails from the regional board this evening that they're preparing our conditional letter for approval, and that will be routed up through the chain, I think, this week. So hopefully we'll get that soon. And of course, we're working and have worked with the sanitary districts and the regional board to get them exceptions to allow them to use their secondary water for sewer flushing. And we're working with commercial truck hauling on a number of applications, from dust control, construction, wash down of parking lots, and hopefully some residential customers who have expressed an interest in large volumes of water will be able to use commercial truck hauling services to get that water to their residents. And of course, we looked at groundwater storage and recovery. That is a longer term opportunity. There really isn't a near term solution that would help us in this current drought, but we are participating in that. And of course, desalination, the timing of our need, of course, dictates that any desalination facility would be temporary and as we noted last time we talked, somewhat capacity constrained. And so water transfers, we are pursuing the feasibility of that project. And so next slide, Lucy. And so at the July 16th Ops Committee, we talked about these options, desal and water transfers, and the pros and cons are listed here. But since then, since the Ops meeting, because of the constraints and the timing associated with desalination, staff has really focused our efforts at developing the water transfers and finding out more information about that.
So Paul, if I could, I think President Kohler asked me to capture the customer, the public comment, the question of going out to the voters for desal. And what this slide shows is really the feasibility assessment that we've completed in context of the drought. Desalination really is not shown to be feasible to meet our potential needs. So we do not have any plans at this point to go to the voters to pursue a desalination project.
Thanks, Ben. And so as we move to the next slide, the draft water transfer schedule was also presented at the July 16th Ops meeting and is set up here to show delivery of water by July of next year. So in the past couple of weeks since the Ops meeting, the team has, made some progress in the areas of assessing options and continuing to work on verifying the feasibility of the project. And indicated here on the schedule as well are, a couple of key decision points for the board. But notably, not indicated on the schedule are 3 contracts that staff will be bringing to the ops committee in August that will allow our team of consultants to complete the feasibility work and to begin some engineering work necessary to support the framing of CEQA. At this time, I don't have an estimate for the sort of dollars for those contracts, but as I say, we'll be bringing that to the ops committee.
Paul, I have a related question.
Yep.
On looking into whether we could do rail transfer. I was looking at what is it? Glen Calusa. You know, the location of Glen Calusa, and whether there's any possibility of moving the water from a provider like that, maybe move it over to Sonoma and then wheel it down through Sonoma, or get, you know, a rail connection from a provider and bring it down the freight line, you know, to some convenient point, if there is one, where we could put it in the system.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I think in concept it works. It's a very challenging in practice, as you might imagine. Rail cars are, I think, about 30,000 gallons per rail car, so you'd have, you know, massive lines of rail cars. If you I can't do the math in my head as to how many rail cars, you know, 1 million gallons is, but it'd be a lot. 40, right? And so we're talking about needing 10 times that number, or maybe 15 times that number potentially. And
on a daily basis?
Yeah, that's right. And so offloading and unload, you know, that sort of quantity of water from trains would be logistically very challenging, I think.
And the price, and also the cleaning of the cars, you know, they're not used to hauling water, huh?
Right.
They're used to hauling petroleum products and Prel shampoo and things like that. So the cleaning is a big deal. To get it to drinking water standards, I would doubt you could even do it.
Well, you know, they're looking into it up in Mendocino, and, you know, considering it's a $100 million project, you know, as far as the cost is concerned, I don't know how it pencils out. And I know it sounds a little off the wall, but, you know, we possibly could get that going faster than we could construct a pipeline. It's just something that I think should be considered, or at least looked into.
We can certainly put pencil to paper on that and see what it would look like.
Well, just keep in mind that chemicals like Roundup absorb into stainless steel and then leach out into the next product.
Well,
so, you know, I think, just let me finish. I think you're talking at least 4,000 an acre foot for that to happen, to transport. It's an interesting idea, as Paul said, and it's creative thinking, and that's good. But it's really pricey to truck things or to train them.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to consider too, and I know we tend to talk about these things separately, but we're still at 124 gallons of water per person per day. So I think this kind of, option, and I agree with Larry, it is creative, but I think it's the kind of thing you get to once you've really made that investment demand reduction that we haven't made yet, because right now we'd be doing that to water lawns, right? I mean, at that level of use. So I'd really like to see us, get, to go back to Carrie's report for a minute. I mean, I'm delighted, really, thrilled to see that we finally have some, specific targets for what we want to be doing. But if you go back, you'll see they're fairly modest, right? I mean, we're not talking about really getting down our demand in a major way. And until we're really investing, I think, in those options, I think this kind of thing, Larry, again, it's creative, but I think it's hard to talk about spending 4,000 an acre foot when we're not even willing to spend 1,200 on, landscape changeouts and gray water and cisterns and all the rest of it. That's really where I think I'd rather see us putting our resources as a district, before we're looking at that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the only reason I'm putting it out there is just as a counterpoint to building a permanent pipeline. And I do agree with you. And I don't understand why the district is not setting per person per day goals. Whether it's 50 gallons a day, 75 gallons a day, those are very clear goals for our customers that I think they actually want to hear from us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is a longer term conversation, but I think where we're really heading is budget-based rates. I think that's where that kind of thing really comes home, and where you're really able to communicate with the consumers about, what is being expected on a day-to-day basis.
But I mean, can't we just set a goal without, setting formal budgets?
We
Just
can.
like, hey, this is what.
But to Larry Russell's point, I'm just going to channel you for a minute, Larry. That's a hard thing to do unless everybody's got either AMI or a flume meter.
They can look at their bill,
2 months later.
Well, at least they'll have an idea what they should be shooting
Right.
for, and or they can look at their flume. But right now, people I think are not, the message is a little too complex, and, double digit, the per gallon per day goal is something that I think would resonate with people. So I really don't understand why we're sort of hesitant to just put it out there as a goal for our customers.
Well, I agree. I feel like I've been singing that song for a long time, so I'm glad we're on the same page about that.
Haven't we already talked about it being 60 gallons per person per day? I mean, I feel like we've talked about that, and maybe that can still be messaging that we can just, if we've already been there and talked about this, we can maybe, ask that become maybe part of our messaging going forward. Yes, there are problems, like unless you have a flume device or AMI, you can't tell what your daily usage is, but it's still, people can look at their bills and go, oh, wow, last month or last billing period, I was much higher than that. I should do better. But no harm in putting it out there in maybe in a stronger way.
No, and if you look at the Healdsburg Drought page, they actually have right on the opening page how to read your water meter with a photo of the water meter. So it's just very simple, very clear.
Excellent suggestion. And it could be printed on the bill, in red letters.
That. I'm pretty sure we do. Well, we have in the past at least. So.
No, we don't know the number of people. So we would just have to say, this is what you're shooting for. And as Larry said, you take the volume, multiply by 7.48, then divide by people. You have the days, and you have the usage in gallons per capita per day.
I understood we were doing a short video to be on the website on how to read your meter. I'm not sure, that may be there now. I don't know, but I heard it was in process.
I believe that's right. We've gotten fairly far afield of Paul's presentation, so I think we can let him get back to that.
I feel like I really need the satellite stuff, Ben. Okay, so moving then to the next slide, Lucy, to the drought project planning chart. So this is a chart we're familiar with. And so this evening, though, we really would like to just start thinking about, the key assumptions behind this chart. Because this chart and the assumptions are kind of driving the project schedule, right? The water supply is what at the moment is being presented by this chart. And it's the key assumptions of conservation level and, of course, rainfall and runoff. And so tonight, another time we'll review the conservation, because I feel like we have a decent handle on that. And so for tonight, then let's take a look at the rainfall and runoff aspects that are kind of driving this chart. And before we get into this, there are a myriad of ways that we can kind of analyze data, and for a great deal of uncertainty, right, in forecasting rainfall and runoff and storage levels associated with those two parameters. So we recognize what we're presenting tonight is really not perfect. It's just another way for us to think about how to frame the conversation around what do we think is going to be happening, what's likely to happen this coming winter and even beyond, in terms of what would our storage levels, what could they look like, and how do we grapple with that question that's really driving this sort of water supply risk question that we're faced with. So the drought planning chart, the first one that we were looking at, has the assumption built into it that we would receive the same level of rainfall and runoff that we did in 2020, 2021. So this past winter just gone. That rainfall and runoff is quite low. It's among some of our lowest. So the question then is it perhaps too conservative to be using in our project planning scenario? And so one way to think about this and to try to answer that question is to look at this sort of series of lines before you here, which represent different runoff rainfall amounts, ranging from 60% of average on the green line to 70% of average on the blue line, 80% on the orange line, and then the gray line represents average. So as we then, if we would just to pause for a moment and just we're looking at this as if it was our bank statement, or hopefully it's not our bank statement, right? But or our investment portfolio in my case. Let's look at the blue line as an example. And this December, you can see most of the lines will be right around the 30,000 acre feet, which is right. And there's some level of error in predictions, there just always is. So what's the plus or minus factor on these? I'd be hard pushed to say. It could be as much as plus or minus 10. But anyway, this December, the blue line indicates we'll be right around 30,000 acre feet or so. And this is assuming that we can maintain 20% and as an annualized conservation level. And right now, on an annual basis, just sort of looking at what we've done in conservation, we're about 17%, I think. So yeah, it's certainly within reason on the conservation. So then 30,000 acre feet this December, by our water storage contingency planning levels, that's an emergency type condition for us as a water district. So then let's move through the winter on the blue line to where you see the vertical line, which sort of denotes April of next year. And then you'll note that happily the storage levels have gone up, and we're right around 45,000 acre feet next April 1st. Again, to put that in perspective, I think there have been only 2 other times in our records that we've been that low since Kent's come up, right? So it's still pretty low for us on our water storage contingency plan, shortage contingency plan that we just had with the urban water management plan would see us taking certain actions as if it were a stage of drought. And as we progress down the blue line to December of 2022, we see that we're basically back where we started this December, right around 30,000 acre feet. So, that's how do we use this then is the question. And you'll see on the right, there are some percentages given. And these are just straight statistics from our historical database showing, in the case of the green line, that there's an 11% chance of receiving at least that level of rainfall and runoff. So that level or less is an 11% chance. And so for the blue line, you have a 22% chance of receiving that level of rainfall and runoff, right, or less. And so on as you go up to the 80%, it's 37%. And then the gray, which you remember is our average runoff, you have a 59% chance of receiving that level of rainfall and runoff or less. So it's not a 59% chance that you're going to get an average. It's average or less. So So these are very crude and basic statistics. These are not sort of the next level that we could talk about, which would be, and we're not going to tonight, which would be conditional probabilities and things like that. They get a little bit more complex. So this is just an attempt to look at what the likelihood is, if you like, of certain scenarios regarding rainfall and runoff. And the reason for framing it this way, and you heard me mention it earlier, is this is really a classic risk problem for us. And as we know, risk is sort of a product of consequence and likelihood. And when the consequence is very high, even if the likelihood is low, or especially when the likelihood is low, it's a very challenging decision. So we're not trying to answer the question as to what exactly is the storage level going to be. It's just a way to help us frame this problem that we've got before us. So tonight we're not looking to solve this problem, but just present another way to look at it. So I think, yep.
Can I just ask you quickly? So I think this is really helpful. I really appreciate your framing this in terms of risk. I think it's very useful. I think it's a challenging thing for us to communicate to the public. You know, it's uncomfortable to work in the world of uncertainty, but I think I think that's really your point, right? Is that it is uncertain, and that these are the various, you know, risk levels that we're dealing with. I wonder about the assumption about 20% annual conservation. It seems to me we were just having a whole conversation about this. We can do, and I frankly think we're going to do significantly better, and not just in response to the drought, but in terms of long-term climate resilience, you know, and all the rest of it. We really, that 124 gallons of water per person per day is not sustainable. At least I'm hearing a very strong board consensus around that. You know, and it's not like we're going to get down to 60. And again, that's an average. There'll always be people below and some above, but we're not going to get there overnight. It's going to take some significant investment. It's going to take some time. But I mean, if we are looking at conservation that gets down to 40% from the baseline, and just to be clear again, but you're measuring this from a 3-year average baseline, right? Okay. So if we can double that, and I do think we can, doesn't that talk to us a little bit about how that changes your risk scenarios?
Yes. So so built into this is a 20% annual conservation, which I wasn't planning to get into the details because it's helpful to have some diagrams to think about this. But in general, a 20% annual conservation is going to require us, right? Because the easiest way for us to think about gaining on conservation is in terms of capturing irrigation or outdoor water use. That's one area, right? The other area obviously is indoor water use. And so which of those two areas is easier or more difficult, right? So outside irrigation is obviously, we think, easier for us to kind of capture that market. So even with 20% annual conservation, that's going to require us to capture something like 40 to 50% of our outdoor irrigation to meet this sort of annualized conservation of 20%. Moving to a 40% annual conservation level, that's essentially, right, getting close, but not quite, to cutting our total demand in half. So moving,
which is what we were just talking about. I mean, I think we heard, you know, a number of us on the board saying we think a 60, you know, GPCD is a reasonable target.
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation, and I think we can't, you know, going forward, we have to have that level of conservation, regardless. So obviously, if we had greater levels of conservation applied to these lines, they would move up proportionately. So if 20% of if our annual demand is $25,000, acre feet per year, 20% of that, 5,000 acre feet, 40% would be 10,000 acre feet, right? So that you would move each of these lines up 5,000 acre feet from where they currently are, essentially.
Right. Okay, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. Okay, thanks.
And so I think, we're sort of done with this slide, I think. And I do have one, we did hear some questions, and this is similar to what we were just talking about. What would it take for us to have conservation equivalent to a 15,000 acre foot water transfer project? And so these are the numbers for our demand, 3-year average demand of 25,880 acre feet. And of course, since we're trying to obtain equivalent to the project, the conservation savings we're going to set at 15,000 acre feet. And what we'd be looking at capturing is when we look at outdoor irrigation during just the summer months, it looks like the total volume of that water using these average demands is about 7,600 acre feet. So we'd need to capture all of that. And that's defined as, that irrigation is defined as above January, February average monthly use, which we're sort of using as in our benchmark for indoor water use, because typically January and February are our rainiest months and we wouldn't expect folks to be irrigating, even though we know people leave their sprinklers on all winter sometimes, but generally speaking. So that's how we came up with the 7,600 acre feet. We would want to capture all of that outdoor irrigation, which would then mean we would need to, so from the 25,880 acre feet, we subtract 7,600, and that leaves us 17,500 or so acre feet. And we need to capture another 7,400 acre feet to make up the 15,000. If we do that, and that's going to come from indoor water use, that will make our target demand, once we subtract the 15,000 from the 25,880, at 10,880 acre feet per year. This is another way to think of this would be moving from our current 129 gallons per capita per day to 50 gallons per capita per day. And then we would want to ask ourselves, okay, what's our experience been in terms of levels of compliance, and how would we, think about achieving really this hard target? And would we then maybe target a more stringent level of conservation, setting, an allotment of perhaps, 37.5 gallons per capita per day, if we assumed a 75% compliance rate. And then we want to be cognizant of the fact that while we're hoping that this drought is short-term, it could be quite long-term in nature, and we've seen that certainly in the past. And so it's I think a fair question about sustaining this level of conservation.
Paul, what is the basis of the 15,000 acre foot per year transfer?
It represents the volume is basically associated with our wintertime demand. So if we took our wintertime demand across the year, it's about 17,000 or so acre feet, and 15,000 acre feet then represents essentially some indoor water use with some level of conservation applied to that indoor water use. So
I guess I'm having a hard time understanding if we're getting approximately 4,500 acre feet a year from Sonoma. Are you saying we need 15,000, we're short 15,000 acre feet based on what you're seeing?
Well, the assumption is that we'll be, it is conceivable, right, that we don't have a supply from Sonoma. If we're in the same basic geographic area, the assumption is that at some point there's no more supply. So this is really, this level, because you're planning a project of this nature, you want to plan for sort of a scenario where you can be certain of providing Marin with our sort of health and safety needs.
So this is kind of a worst case scenario estimate of the capacity that you'd be planning on.
Right. And so certainly you wouldn't necessarily have to apply all of it each year. It would be highly dependent on the year that you were facing. Okay, so if there are no more questions, just summarizing then, conservation would be essential to meet any project schedule for water supply. And I think going forward, as President Kohler has pointed out, it's got to be part of our DNA regardless. And then conservation in lieu of a water transfer, we just saw might be at 37.5 gallons per capita per day. And then looking at runoff scenarios maybe helps us think about this as a risk problem and frames that and helps us consider the need for a project.
Mm-hmm.
And the next steps are that we're going to continue to keep the pedal down as best we can on drought outreach and conservation efforts. And we're going to continue to we've got 10 more days or so of operation of Sulahuli. And we're going to continue to work, as I mentioned, with Sonoma County Water Agency on any and all water supply opportunities that they may come up with. And of course, we're going to be coming back to the board regularly with monitoring and reporting for all of these. And President Kohler, you mentioned the conservation goals. I think Carrie's planning at the next comms meeting, you guys to take a bit of a deep dive into those as well. And we're going to continue to pursue and develop the water transfer options. That concludes our update on water transfers and the drought update tonight.
Sorry, any more board comments on this item before we go to public comment? Okay, Terry, any public comment on this item?
Yes, ma'am. We have Larry Minikes. And then after him, it's 1402 is the phone number.
Good evening. I want to thank staff for really an excellent presentation just now. There's a lot to unpack, and I'm not going to get into it. I just want to offer a suggestion, and perhaps this is already being enacted, but the restaurants aren't partaking in it. I happen to have been in 2 outdoor restaurants in San Rafael in the last few days, and in both times, we were served water and our water glasses were refilled on a frequent basis. And a couple of us were surprised because we thought it was only water on demand like the last drought. So if it is not an action, I would suggest you do it. It's not going to, we know it's not going to save us out of this drought situation, but it does send a message to the community in a passive way if you have to ask for water when you go to a restaurant. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, before we go on, Carrie, do you want to respond to that? I thought we did have a relationship with restaurants on this issue.
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond to that. So we have notified all of our restaurants and offered table tents, and we had very few takers, to be perfectly honest. So we are launching this week, are going forward with the boots on the ground. So we're actually having staff hand deliver table tents to restaurants to make sure that they receive them and they have as many as they need and they understand the importance of the action of putting them out. So I hope that we see less of those comments in the future and we start to see those table tents out and being utilized.
Okay, next comment.
1402.
It's James Holmes Larkspur. I didn't hear included in the drought update reference to the status of the analysis regarding whether to reduce releases for fish. What is the status of that analysis? When is it expected to be completed and a decision rendered regarding it? Thank you.
Ben, would you like to take that one? I think maybe you have more up-to-date info than I do.
We're continue in the study phase. It's an extensive effort to look at modeling of the system and understand if there are opportunities and what they may be to obtain some savings while ensuring we are not adversely impacting the fisheries. And I believe in the next couple weeks, we'll be moving past that and completing that And then we'll be bringing that to the board in public for discussion.
I have no further comments.
Okay, that was an information item. We're going to now move on to item 6, which is also an information item. This is consideration of additional landscape restrictions and other policies for increasing water use efficiency.
Good evening, board. Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager, and I'll be taking this item. Oops. All right, so starting with the overview. So we're going to start with an overview of the adopted landscape restrictions for new connections were recently passed on July 20th. We'll review some of the board comments that were made during the discussion on that item. Talk about some challenges and options for implementing additional restrictions, and then close out with some additional landscape and other policy considerations that the board may direct staff to pursue. So starting with the landscape restrictions. Ordinance 453, as noted, was adopted on July 20th. What this ordinance put in place was that new water service connections would only be approved during the drought if they agreed to one of two options. And these two options are the bottom two bullets on the bottom of the slide there. Option 1 was that they agreed to not install any landscaping that utilized potable water. And the second option was that no new landscaping would be irrigated with potable water or installed to be irrigated with potable water until after the drought was over. And so with this second bullet, it meant that the process of landscape approvals would still continue as usual based on the current code, but no landscape plant material would actually be installed until the drought was over. And of course, this second bullet was what prompted quite a few comments from the board and in turn brought this item back. So some of the items that we heard board discussion on was a request to discuss a permanent restriction on the use of potable water for landscaping utilized by new service connections, and also the interest to gain a better understanding of the impacts if something like this was to be enacted by the district. So staff's put together some of the challenges in pursuing an action like this, and then also some other options for the board's consideration and input. So starting with the challenges to prohibiting the use of potable water on landscaping for new service connections. If we're limiting potable water use, that in turn implies or promotes or requires essentially that alternative water sources be utilized. And so we want to recognize that not all sites are appropriate for alternative water sources. There could be issues with slope, proximity to waterways, setbacks, soil type, et cetera. And so all of these would need to be taken into consideration. I also want to note before we get too far into this discussion that what alternative water sources we're talking about here. So we're talking about gray water, rainwater, potentially stormwater, nuisance water as well. So beyond just site constraints, there's also an item that would need to be addressed around timing, meaning that to ensure that alternative water sources are incorporated into the site design, it would require us to have an ordinance in place in a timely enough manner to ensure that it's actually part of the development of the site, right? So if the site's going to be utilizing gray water, they need to build that in the original design. It can't be something that's necessarily added on. And we've talked about that in the past.
Can I just ask Carrie, you're sort of assuming that the landscaping is going to be exactly the same. Isn't another possibility that they'll simply use other kinds of landscaping that are native low water that don't require significant water, whether potable or alternative? That seems to not be part of your consideration.
Yeah, you're absolutely on point. And so that's probably part of the options that we're going to get into. But that's you're on the right. We're aligned here.
They're not, I mean, you're like, these are the big challenges. And I don't think they are big challenges if you're not trying to do exactly the same kind of high water use landscaping. Isn't that really the point?
Yeah, that is the point. Okay. So we just want to recognize, so if we're not using potable, you're using alternative. So just give me a moment.
Okay,
we'll get there.
All right.
So we also want to recognize that some plant material can't use alternative water sources. For example, root crops and gray water are not a good combination. Furthermore, if we were to enact a prohibition around potable water use for new service connections permanently, so this is meaning beyond drought response, it would potentially require psychoanalysis, and staff would need to look into that further to determine exactly what that path would be. Finally, we want to recognize that there could be some potentially conflicting county and city codes that would need to be addressed. For example, staff has discovered that there's a local ordinance around hardscapes, limiting the amount of hardscapes. And so if you start, if we took the path of limiting the use of potable water, which means that they need to bring their own alternative water sources to be available on site, it may, as a result, increase the square footage of hardscape within each parcel. And so we just want to be able to work through and determine if there are any other conflicting codes prior to enacting something like this. But recognizing that it was clear that the intent of the board was to achieve long-term water savings and reduce landscape demand in new connections. And so looking at what long-term regulations could potentially look like and what those options are. One would be, as I noted, requiring alternative water sources of supply. So this would be that an applicant would be required to have an on-site non-potable supply to meet all of their landscape water use needs. Another way to look at this would be to restrict the type of plant material that is allowed on site. This could be done in a number of ways. One of which would be limiting ornamental, or also known as non-functional turf areas. And this could be broken down into sector-specific limitations. Specifically, a non-residential site may have a prohibition of non-functional turf areas, and a residential site could be allowed a restrictive square footage or percentage of area for turf areas. You know, someone like Southern Nevada Water Authority has a restriction in place that residential customers can install turf, but they can't install it in their front yard, and they have to limit the percentage on site. They have actually, it can't be less than 100 square feet, because less than 100 square feet is kind of a why bother sort of size, right? But it can't be over 5,000 square feet either. And so they do have some specific limitations that have been developed. So something like that could be considered around ornamental or non-functional turf. Furthermore, kind of leaning on that same idea would be clearly defining what functional turf areas would be, right? So this would be schools, parks, ball fields, et cetera, to allow for active use. And so this would need to also be defined and codified. Finally, looking at requiring landscape areas to be only low or very low plant material would be another way to limit the type of plant material that's installed within the landscape. We want to acknowledge that if we were to have a requirement that only low or very low plant material was installed, not only lawns are high water use, right? There's also trees and shrubs that are considered high water use as well. And water features, spas and pools are also considered a high water use demand within the landscape. And so that would need to be taken into consideration. So recognizing that the intent, what staff heard, the intent of the board was really to again, achieve long-term savings and demand reductions from landscaping that's being installed within the service area. Staff is proposing somewhat of a blended option, recognizing some of the constraints, but also some of the opportunities. There's a path that the board could direct staff to go down would be to require applicants to have this on-site non-potable water supply to meet their landscape water use for all of their landscape water use for that site. If that was the case, then putting restriction on the type of plant material wouldn't be needed, because they would only be able to install the types of plants that align with the amount of water that they have available on their site. But if there's a site that they can't provide an adequate amount of water, alternative water supply, then the code could restrict the type of plant material. And this could be done, as I noted, through limiting the ornamental or non-functional turf. Like I said, through specifying through residential type customers, and then also non-residential. We could restrict the plant material to low or very low, as defined by industry standards, and all of this would need to align with a clearly defined, a clear definition of what recreational and non-functional turf actually is, so that we could be enforced, and it would actually be part of our code, so staff would have a clear understanding. So this is an option. I'm sure there's other options as well. I just want to note also enforcement challenges we would need to kind of work through the enforcement piece as this is developed. But I do want to pause here for a moment and see if there's any additional comments or suggestions or feedback from the board on this blended option.
I just have a question. I know there's some residents that are using wells to irrigate, which also has environmental impacts. But that was not included as an alternative water source. And as if this drought deepens, you know, I think we're going to see an uptick on wells. Is that part of, have you considered that? Is that part of your analysis, or is that just sort of an outlier that?
I have not considered it, and I don't know if we can. I'm not sure how that would actually work, but that would be something that definitely would need to be taken into consideration as this is being developed.
I know the county is supposedly the arbiter of wells. You're supposed to get a permit to actually put in a well, so it might be worthwhile to see if we can get that information from the county. As far as the blended approach, you know, you always try to look for, you know, cutting the baby down the middle, and, you know, I think it's a good start. You know, I thought they had problems that they actually exempted residential in Southern Nevada, but I'm hearing something a little different from you.
So the non-functional turf legislation is really focused on non-residential sites. This is for new construction specifically. So they do limit the amount of turf that's allowed for new construction, which is different than their current, you know, what's currently planted within their service area.
And is that what you're contemplating in the blended approach, is sort of capturing that new construction segment?
This is only focused on new construction, correct?
Okay. Okay, I think it's a pretty interesting concept.
Yeah, I just want to thank staff for putting this forward. I think I probably am the one that created the brouhaha around this with my suggestion at the last board meeting. So I appreciate your bringing this forward. I'm wondering, Carrie, if this is a little too complicated though, right? I mean, I think what I had in mind, and, you know, I don't have anything against this approach. It might be more complicated than we need, which is to simply say that we're not going to be using potable water for landscaping on new construction. Doesn't that really just leave it to the developer, to the, you know, to the property owners to decide if they want to go ahead and have landscaping and put in the non-potable alternatives, or if they simply want to go with you know, low water or native landscaping. I mean, obviously we don't want too much hardscape, you know, there's greenhouse gas issues and heat island effects and all of that. But I mean, why not do that? Just simply say, you know, this is the approach we're going to take with new construction. You know, we're not going to be using non-potable. I mean, we're not going to be using potable water outside. So it's up to you. Figure out whether you just want to have native landscaping and low water landscaping that just doesn't need much water, or whether you're going to put in some sort of alternative source water supply. Like, why? This seems like a lot of restrictions, I guess is what I'm saying.
So my comment would be, not needing much water is very different than prohibiting use of potable water across the board, right? So even native plants require some level of irrigation to get established. And so is that going to be an acceptable level of use? And if so, then that would be an option for sure. So it's different than just a blanket prohibition.
Yeah, and again, I'm very open to this as an option. It feels complicated, and it feels like a lot of regulation. And like you say, it would be very difficult. It sounds like it would take a lot of people power to enforce. So I'm just wondering if there is a way to simplify this, and, you know, that would encourage, you know, no or low water landscaping with some, I don't know how much water is needed to get these things established, but it's not much for the most part, at least is in my experience. So, I mean, like I say, I'm very open to this, but I just wonder if there's a simpler approach that gives developers more, you know, more leeway in determining which way they want to go. I mean, I'm not saying I'm against this. This may make more sense, but it just seems a little more. It just seems like a little more flexibility in how to meet the mandate would be useful.
I think the other option would be to do something similar to what we currently have on the books, which just further restricts the water budget.
Yeah.
Right. That maximizes the flexibility. You know, so what our current code allows is what, 25%. I think we've talked about some of that. I believe it was 25% of the site can be planted with turf, and the challenge becomes that if they only put in their plans for the front yard, then, you know, the front yard could be 25% turf, and the backyard we have no actual, you know, code that addresses that. And so,
right. I think what I'd like to see is a policy that says our goal is that we're not using potable water supply outside, full stop, period. And, you know, and leaving it to the developers to figure out how to get there. And if there's some de minimis amount of water that you need to get things established or whatever, I mean, I think that's a separate conversation, but I mean, I don't know, you tell me. I mean, you've come up with this, so it would just be helpful for me to hear about whether you thought about going in that other direction that just says, here's the goal, go figure out how to meet it, as opposed to, you know, this feels like a more managed approach. And again, I'm not against it. I'm just wondering if it wouldn't just be simpler for us to say, here's the goal, go figure out how to meet it.
it's been unmuted. I'll let him go.
Well, President Kohler, what we did with the initial comments from last meeting is go back and think about how would we bring that item forward. And to some extent, the slide on challenges reflected some of the issues that we identified that led us to a bit of a more maybe nuanced approach, thinking, you know, it would be a very big move and a big bite. And I think in terms of the complexities, that would be handled in the design review as it is now. So I don't know it'd be a huge shift. I do appreciate in terms of the messaging, it's not as clear, but in terms of actual working with developers and new customers, we would be able to communicate and work with them in terms of what these requirements are. I think, well, I just as I stated, the challenges that we identified of a blanket prohibition, and as we think about, you know, homeowners, residential parcels, individual ones coming, or that require an upsized meter that would likely trigger this, that there could be unintended consequences. So we could dig deeper into that and bring back a more detailed review of what staff thinks we could be faced with that approach, look at this one a little more, or if the board would like us to bring the blended approach and give us time to pull together what the implementation and the ordinance language would be for your consideration, we could do that.
Okay, so I'm not trying to make it more complicated. And if this is the approach that staff wants to go, that's fine with me. But I do think you're overthinking it. I think you're making this too hard. I mean, the whole first part of this meeting is that we are looking at a very different world. So I didn't find the challenges that you listed compelling at all. I mean, I'm glad you listed them, but they didn't look like challenges to me. They looked like things that you think about if you think you're going to have the same amount of water in the future that you've had in the past. We've just spent an hour and a half talking about how we're not going to. So it doesn't seem rational to me. And I mean, I'd like to hear the rest of the board weigh in that we're approaching new development as if it's just the same as old development, right? I mean, we need to move new development in a way that is more efficient. And we've just spent all this time hearing, I mean, just go back and look at Paul. I guess what I'm saying is we've just spent all this time looking at Paul's chart and uncertainty and risk. And why would we consider going forward with new development without a very different signal about water use outside, right? I mean, we need to take a fundamentally different approach to outdoor landscaping and the easiest place to do that, as Carrie has made clear and is obvious, is with new development. So I think I'm just confused about how you guys are seeing these challenges. They don't really look like challenges to me. It's time for us to be real and to be real with developers and be real with, you know, our consumers and with the public, that we cannot go forward with development the way we have in the past. And you guys have made a very compelling case. We've talked about it for months. outdoor water use is our largest reservoir of opportunity. So I don't understand why we're not just going for that.
And President Kohler, just to be clear, absolutely, this is a policy decision. And, you know, staff is not trying to get in the way by any extent. We're just trying to think about the implementation, and we can take the feedback and redouble the efforts and bring back, you know, more granular thinking in terms of the implementation and how we would do it. But it's certainly the direction of the board, and we'll proceed accordingly.
Okay, well, I think we have to move forward fairly quickly. So not to interrupt you, Larry, but what I'd like to hear from the board is, like, can we get together and giving the staff some direction? I mean, I'm okay with this blended options approach. It does seem complicated to me, and I'm a little concerned about that. But, you know, where's the rest of the board on this? And can we, you know, can we give staff direction so we can turn this into an actionable item?
I think we can, because I think, as we talked the other day, Cynthia, that is not on here is an offset, so that we have no impact from new development. I don't see that one listed anywhere unless I missed it. That means that they pay to extend the dual pipe system, just as you would pay for a water connection. You pay to extend it, or you pay to improve the operation or size of the reclaimed water system, so that you end up with a net zero impact on the water system. I mean, I think that needs to be tossed into this mix, because that, and I agree with Cynthia completely, it's time to take a fresh look at this issue and be creative and not just go down the path we've been down before, and come up with a way to address it. I mean, it's just like we've talked before about George Lucas. When Lucas wanted to join the water district, he was required to, for his Grady Ranch, he was required to pay, and agreed to gleefully, he didn't push back at all, on a expansion of the reclaimed water system as his offset for the 30 acre feet that they needed for that facility. And I think, you know, while 30 acre feet is an awful lot for most facilities, that's the kind of thinking that needs to be added to this, in my opinion.
Okay, I think Larry and I are on the same page. Other board comments, so we can find
That
direction?
is a much simpler approach. I agree with you, Cynthia, that this is very complex. I mean, it does the job, I guess, and I'm for certainly the direction, but if we could make it simpler, it would be better. I think Larry's approach is heading to a more simpler approach.
Okay, Larry, Bragman, Monty, do you guys want to weigh in?
Sure. I mean, I you know, obviously we're in a new reality, and so we do need to come up with something, and we want to come up with something that is simple and makes sense. I think, you know, my 2 cents to add to this would be, you know, this is again, not to make Southern Nevada like the pinnacle of it, but I would look at what desert communities, you know, who have been grappling with this for longer, how maybe there's some examples there. I mean, I like Director Russell's suggestion about a fee, you know, to have a zero offset. I wouldn't want to see developers that have the funding to basically pay that and then put in inefficient landscaping or you know, less than the kind of conservation landscaping that we're looking for. So I want to be thoughtful about, you know, we just don't want to engender that kind of a dynamic. So I'd like to see, maybe look at some examples of other leaders, other cities that have been addressing this, and I guess also some, you know, some thought about what an offset would look like. I do like that.
Monty,
that concept.
You're right on here. 2 things to keep in mind. One is that we should also look at an offset that increases conservation, so that, you know, it isn't just a matter of the reclaimed water, or that there's a third option there, which is to expand that with that, you know, tag that money so it's clearly put into that pot. And your question or your comment is a very interesting one. I don't know how much you know about Palm Springs area, but Palm Springs does not allow the irrigation of golf courses with potable water. So there's this huge fight every time a new development is introduced in that environment. They have a fight for which wastewater district is going to get it, so that they can then irrigate the golf course, a new golf course potentially. So yeah, I've never seen any place like it before. It's where I think that generally today in Palm Springs, reclaimed wastewater is more valuable than potable water because it has more uses. And that's what changes here. For instance, you mentioned Mill Valley. Mill Valley has SASM treatment plant that's right there by the city center, you know, that I don't know what exactly it's called, but it's a place for kids and adults. And their SASM is a perfect example of how they could treat that water and use it on the golf course up the hill. The golf course is not that far away, but we just aren't getting there in terms of our thinking. And we should give serious thought to requiring golf courses to use reclaimed water, period. And that's, you know, that's what Palm Springs does. It's the legislation's already existing that tells you how to do it. And like I say, it changes the environment from, well, we don't really want that wastewater to we really need that wastewater. And it changes. I mean, the term wastewater is not even a good term because it's not wastewater. It's money water.
Okay.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry, Larry Bregman, you want to speak?
yeah, no, I agree. I think this is a great conversation. I really do, because I think the future is going to be different, and we have to be sort of trying to shape it now going forward. The way people look at the landscape and maybe the way they value water, like Larry Russell explained. So, you know, I'm not sure, you know, whether the strict approach that President Kohler has suggested would work or not, or whether we, you know, we could see, you know, I think it would be worth having staff do a little more digging, getting a little more granular on what's going on in Southern Nevada and other model districts. We're always going to have a variance process available to customers that don't quite fit into, you know, whatever peg that we create. And I also agree that we should be focusing on our reclaimed water system and expanding it, and, you know, surcharging folks to make connections. So, you know, I prefer to see us surcharging to connect their project where feasible, and not just creating a fund, but an actual process by which they're required to hook up where it's feasible. So, you know, I think it's an excellent conversation. I think we need to go a little further, maybe have staff bring us some other information from other jurisdictions, but I think it's a great conversation, and we should be pursuing this vigorously for the rest of the summer, because these are the changes we need to make to become a resilient community.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to summarize for staff, I think we have board consensus that we are looking for another iteration of the proposal. And I think, I'll just ask my fellow board members if this is a fair summary of what I've heard. I think we want to have a policy that new development should be zero net water for outdoors to the maximum extent possible, right? Like, just make it clear that that's where we're going. This isn't, we're going to have landscaping as usual, and you're just going to figure out how to do that in an efficient way. It really is, we want a completely different approach to landscaping. And at the same time, I want to be very respectful of the city and county planning agencies that don't want everything to be hardscaped, because obviously heat island and, you know, greenhouse gas effects and all of that. So, you know, I think what we're looking for is another iteration of this proposal that puts that policy clearly up front. and that provides us with some options for implementing that. And while I appreciate you leading with the challenges, I'm just going to suggest that that's not maybe the most constructive approach. I think we're trying to figure out what works. And I think then let's talk about what really is a serious challenge. I don't think CEQA review is a challenge. It's just a process. It's not a reason not to do something. Is that a fair summary of what we're looking for here?
I think so.
Yeah, it's what I heard, and I think we can do that. In terms of process, if I could. So I think that kind of statement goal was very helpful to guide us and just to guide the entire process in terms of the intent. And we will take back all we heard. And I do think it is important for us to understand and share with the board in greater detail what some of these other desert communities have done and why. They're allowing residential turf, for example, and that kind of thing, if they are, and just understand the process and thinking they've gone through to just provide that data point and benefit in terms of the process. But regardless,
I want to make sure I understand what you just said, Ben. You think we should be considering why they are allowing? I mean, I think I'm hearing this board say very clearly, we don't want to be.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not trying to be argumentative.
Okay.
What I'm hearing is a good deal of interest on these agencies that have grappled with this for years and decades with exceedingly consistent low water supplies, where they've landed on these issues and why, just to benefit from their experience, not to drive it or that we have to take what they're doing. We could be bolder and maybe we should. But just, I guess, the heart of what I was trying to get at is really develop a matrix with understanding of these very arid areas and what they've done, and include that in the information we bring back to the board. But with the focus, absolutely, we heard the board in terms of fundamentally shifting and the overarching goal that you captured of
zero net water.
Zero net water for
Right.
new connections for landscaping, and
Right.
how kind of we bring back maybe the key tenets of the ordinance or something like that in the next round for the board's consideration.
And could Ben, could you also, or somebody get the well data from the county?
Yeah.
Because we could be creating some unintended consequences here. So
yes.
And I could be wrong, Ben, but I mean, I just really want to keep you guys from going off on tangents that we don't need. What I heard, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page about this, is we're looking for information from those desert communities about how they have limited outdoor water use, not how they have decided not to limit outdoor water use. I don't think that's constructive. That's not where we need to go. I mean, it's August. We've been talking about this for months. And I mean, not this proposal in particular, but we've been talking about getting more serious, ramping up conservation. So I think a research project into why desert communities have allowed turf is not where you need to be putting your time. What I heard the board asking for is, what have they put in place to limit outdoor water use? And I think that's where the research needs to be, not on the other side of the equation.
And to that end, Cynthia, I'm just looking at a page from the Coachella Valley Water District.
Yeah.
And they have 106 golf courses. In the last 3 years, they removed 165 acres of turf from 26 golf courses with a savings of 1,000 acre feet per year.
Yeah.
So that's where they're going. Even when they're using the reclaimed water, they're still making them remove out excess turf that's just put there for looks and not for any functional usage. Yeah, I mean, as you've heard me say before, I'm a very strong believer in little steps for little feet. And there's no sense in starting from scratch. These guys have already figured it out. And what we haven't figured out is we're just like them, except we think we're not. In other words, we're not as dry as Palm Springs, but we're a lot more like Palm Springs than we are like London or Canada.
Yes, I would say we're nothing like London. Good call.
We're rain-wise.
We're regular.
Right.
Yeah, I'll just tee off of where you went there with, to look at where excess turf could be removed. And I want to go back to my previous point, which is to really try to get a sense of, did Southern Nevada, with their policy to remove non-functional turf, is that a direction that's worth us considering? I mean, it just, when it comes to something that's just ornamental, that's not serving a purpose, nobody's playing on it, nobody's using it in any way, it's just visuals, that just strikes me as one of the places that we ought to really consider whether that's the return on that.
And Director Schmidt, we are capturing that in the next segment of the slides coming up, where we're looking at beyond new connections. So we have good direction. Thank you for that in terms of new connections and bringing back additional information for the board's consideration. And now Carrie is going to go into additional policy considerations that includes the topic you raised, Director Schmidt.
And Ben, also, I think we should highlight some of the folks that are doing really good jobs. For instance, on Paradise Drive, there's a set of buildings owned by a company called Pasha, P-A-S-H-A. Their grass doesn't look as bad as my grass looks, but it looks a lot more like my grass than green grass. It's pretty brown. They've really cranked back, and they have a large amount of landscaping, and they've just obviously almost cut the water off to it because it's almost all brown now. So I think we should highlight those guys on our webpage and say, look, this is what you can do. You can make a big change. I don't know what their water usage drop is. There's probably 12 or 14 office buildings in the complex. It's a lot of buildings. And I have no idea how much they've dropped their water usage, but I bet it's considerable because at least half of their land is grass.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Okay, I'm just mindful that it's already 9:15 and we've got a bunch more items. So Ben, do you feel like you've got the direction you need from us to bring back an action? I don't know if we can do an action item next time. I'd like to see it. Let's see if we can move in that direction.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Very good. So I just have a couple more slides that we can get through, including other policy considerations. So this is recognizing that the prior discussions was really only focused on new connections, but there are opportunities to look at landscaping, currently installed landscaping within the service area. And Director Schmidt brought this up a number of times, looking at non-functional turf. So there's an opportunity to phase in an approach to prohibiting the irrigation of non-functional turf. I'll note that our current code actually prohibits the irrigation of ornamental turf on public street medians. So kind of expanding this idea of public street medians that have turf, that would be considered a non-functional turf area, but there's maybe other opportunities for us to look at widening that prohibition to really address turf grass that doesn't need to be irrigated, that's not providing any function to our community. Furthermore, looking at rehabilitated landscapes. So again, the prior discussion was only on new connections. So there's really an opportunity for us to, and for the board to direct staff to pursue, aligning our rehabilitated landscape requirements with whatever direction we end up going with for the new connections, right? Recognizing that our current landscapes, even though they may not be getting a new meter, but they oftentimes do still go through landscape plan review, and there's an opportunity there for us to kind of shift what's currently out there in the service area as far as type of plant material, et cetera. Furthermore, looking at indoor fixtures and outdoor water use, there's an opportunity to look at a policy for updating and expanding our current water efficiency standards that are within our code. It might include something like including the installation of hot water recirculating systems as part of a requirement for connecting. There's other opportunities around looking at time of service and time of sale ordinances, both of which we've had in the past, and really would focus on in requiring customers to replace inefficient fixtures, either at a time of sale or when they sign up with the district for water service. Kind of a spin on this time of sale, time of service ordinance is what I'm calling the Fairfax model. And the town of Fairfax has adopted a code, a regulation that actually when they go out to do an inspection, either for a remodel or a resale, they're verifying the types and the flow rates of the fixtures that are currently installed in that property. It's great because it ensures that those water fixtures are as efficient as the current code requires, but it also minimizes staff time, and they're already out there in the field doing these inspections. So there's another opportunity for us to work closely with our partners in the community, or within our local jurisdictions, to implement and ensure indoor fixtures are as efficient as possible. A couple other policy considerations, focusing again on new connections, is a development of an offset program. And I think we've heard from the board from the prior discussion that there is quite a bit of interest on that front. And so that's noted here as well. So in addition, the final item would be recognizing that rates do impact water demand, and there will be an opportunity down the road in the near future for a discussion on the rate structure elements, and then of course it'll be happen at a separate venue at a later date. But I didn't want to just overlook the concept that rates do impact water use demand.
I really appreciate your including when you say budgets. I assume you're talking there about budget-based rates.
Yes.
I think that's great. I can't wait for us to get there.
Carrie, but before we show the final slide, can you back up one slide?
Absolutely.
So we are interested in feedback from the board on interest in some of these policy opportunities of where you'd like to see more information to consider these. And ideally kind of what we would just take your feedback and try and assimilate it in a prioritized way. Of course, we have a tremendous amount of work going on, and absent this discussion, we would focus on the new connections. Perhaps you'd want one of these in advance of that. I'm not suggesting, but do any of these resonate with any of the board members in terms of you'd like to see more information on these, so we can start moving some of these forward in a fashion, in kind of a prioritized way that aligns with what you'd like to see?
Well, I'll just start by saying I think you've heard a lot of conversation tonight about non-functional turf, so I would say that's a pretty high priority. Would the other board members agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then I'll just jump in for me. I mean, I would say, all of the above. But after that, I would certainly probably prioritize each of the bullets under indoor fixtures and outdoor use. These are all, different things that will take different amounts of time. But I think those are all important to pursue. I think one thing that's not here, that's not necessarily, well, it's a policy consideration, and that is really working with the county and the other land use planning agencies. Because some of they really have jurisdiction over a number of areas that we don't. And I've already had a number of people, certainly Supervisor Moulton Peters has reached out to me, so I think there's a real, I think the comms team has done a great job engaging our land use sister agencies. And I think they're all really engaged. They're all really aware about what the situation is. So I think there's a real opportunity there to not only be to expanding this list to not just policies that we can enact, but that the land use planning agencies can where they can go farther than we can.
Again, Cynthia, I would recommend that while we're talking to places like Coachella Valley, we ask exactly that question.
Yeah.
Well, how do they interact with the land use planners? And because they've already done it, they've already been down that road.
Right, exactly. Yes, at the risk of mixing up my hats, we've done a whole study at Water Now about integrating land use and water planning, and we're happy to make that available to the district for free.
That'd be great.
It has all those case studies, many case studies about doing just that.
Could I just add on the Fairfax model? I have been in conversation with San Anselmo, and I want to open a conversation with Ross. The Fairfax model is for high efficiency toilets, which is great, but I'm wondering if staff could give us or give me some suggestions about some other indoor fixtures that we could include in a model ordinance. That would be something that would be very helpful to move that forward to other jurisdictions.
Okay. And I just want to make sure everybody else has weighed in. Ben, do you feel like you've gotten the direction you need here?
Yeah, and it's consistent with what we expected. Non-functional turf does feel like low-hanging fruit and something potentially relatively easy to bring to the board and to implement and move forward. And then similar, really thinking about time of sale or time of service and other ways to enhance our efficiency standards, and working with the other jurisdictions, which is really building on the Fairfax model where they have a built-in process to do that now. And it's seems very efficient. So yeah, I think we do. Thank you.
Okay. All right. That was it for us.
Great.
Very
So
good.
that, I'm sorry. Thank you. This was a great presentation, and we really appreciate how extraordinarily hard staff is working on all these issues.
Yeah.
We really do. This brings us to item 7, which is
we have several speakers or public comments on this item.
I am so sorry. I apologize to everybody participating. I was just like trying to move through the agenda. I really apologize. Thank you, Terry. Let's go to the public comment on this item.
Sure, we have 4, Frank Egger and then 8800, please. Mr. Egger.
Thank you very much. Frank Egger, Fairfax. Everyone in Marin needs to understand just how bad this historic drought really is. Creeks and rivers all over Northern California will be going dry by September, October at the latest. Lake Sonoma and Lake Mendocino water levels are dropping faster than previous predictions. Historic water rights are going by the wayside. They will be cut off sooner than ever envisioned. The state says 55 gallons of water per person is necessary for health, safety, and for basic health, safety, and welfare. The only way to really gauge that here in Marin is by listing the number of people living in each of the service connections. That way you could allocate a minimum amount of water necessary for that family or those persons to survive. The list of water districts that have stated they have surplus water is quickly evaporating. Northern California fisheries are on life support. Any new development needs to establish its own source for irrigation and toilet flushing. That means reuse of their own wastewater, a private reclamation system. Marin Water needs an immediate hookup moratorium while it develops individual on-site reclamation systems for new projects. The 312 wells in the Ross Valley may be needed by the district for the health, safety, and welfare of current Marin Water customers, rather than these wells supplying water for lawns and outdoor plantings. Your staff mentioned the Fairfax model. I authored that ordinance in Fairfax after the 1976-77 drought. It's been on the books for an awful long time. Marin needs, I should say, Marin must have a tanking trucking service that delivers reclaimed wastewater from the Central Marin Sanitary Agency for street trees, parks, and private outdoor plantings. Thank you very much, directors, for being on top of this issue.
Thank you. 8800, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Nancy Okada. I have a couple of suggestions. One is that since the district is being, or the board is being so generous with continuing to allow new hookups, that as our water supply dwindles, if you're going to continue to allow these new hookups with or without landscaping, which we've just spent an hour listening to landscaping, that I can't believe any landscaping would be put in without considering water needs, that the board would really direct staff to the general manager to basically give us at each board meeting information on how many new connections were approved and how many new connections were applied for. Because in the name of transparency, we really need to know this. You're asking the entire district of water users to pitch in and help conserve water. And at the same time, whether it makes money for you or not, you are allowing additional users to hook up into the system and take that water. And you see new construction going on the freeway. I can see across from Civic Center, huge buildings going up. These are all using water. They look like residential or apartments. If you put that in on the website and also have the district manager every time say how many new hookups, new connections were approved and how many new connections were applied for, then at least the public would know where we're going in terms of how much water they're being denied, going to be denied in the future. Because as soon as those hookups go on, you've got more and more and more users. And I agree with everything that Frank Eger said. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speakers I have are Larry Menekes, Deli Woodring, and Baron Hamill.
Cynthia, my feelings were so hurt when you forgot us there for a moment.
I really apologize.
No, a very good presentation. A lot of good conversation as well. And I appreciate other people hanging in there for this long as well. This really does tie into some of the work we're doing at Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership with the NWPA. And that is in helping people plant correctly, put the correct type of landscaping in. And this gives really the board an opportunity as well to address what's really the effects of climate change. And what we should be looking at are drought tolerant native plants that also, at least a percentage, support pollinator species. And that's a big problem that we're having, is that we really need to support these species. And this is something I can see. You can raise the consciousness of people who are putting in new landscaping to do something that is really positive for the environment. And thank you. It's been a long evening.
Thank you. Deli Woodring, please.
Hi, I would like to say that I definitely agree with the first two speakers in this episode. I'm a little bit confused, and I'm also getting more and more terrified because I do not think we are hitting the problem head on, as we spend a lot of time talking about and maybe nitpicking landscaping policies. I'm getting the feeling that we're not really seeing the desert through the cactus. And the bottom line here is that we cannot afford at this point to have new water users in Marin County. And I think a lot of your rate-paying customers would feel a lot better about our future if we could see something major like this happen, such as no new hookups. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hamill, please.
Thank you. Something that I've been discussing with the interior design industry long before I retired as a designer, and forgive the pun, building on the Fairfax model, please consider adding that all kitchen and bath remodel permits must include recirculating hot water systems. This is something that would need to be implemented at the town permit level. Thank you again for taking another one of my ideas under consideration. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I have no further speakers.
I'm sorry, Terry, do we have any more comments?
No, we do not have any more comments.
Okay.
President Kohler,
yeah.
I just wanted to, as we move past the drought items, speak to one item that was raised because it's an important item, and I just wanted the board and the public to be clear on it. And that was the question regarding water quality as our reservoirs lower. And I want to assure the board and the public that this drought is not impacting the quality of the water. We do the same testing, we do the same assurances, and we have absolute confidence that the quality of the water our customers are getting in this drought and throughout the drought, however it plays out, will be of the highest quality for public health and safety and meeting all requirements, and it will not be impacted by the level of the reservoirs.
Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate you remembering that. And that might be something, Emma, that we want to put on the webpage somewhat prominently. I know I seem to remember getting an email about the annual water quality report fairly recently, but it can get lost on the website. So we may want to make that prominent.
That's a great suggestion, Cynthia. Let me add one more little thing. The city of Salinas has an ordinance that requires those hot water recirculation systems. I suggest, Molly, you take a look at Salinas's requirement because it would be easy to incorporate that.
Okay, so if there's nothing else on this item, I'm looking to move on to item 7. Are we all good? Okay. Item 7 is the request to fill the water conservation specialist, a very timely thing. And I assume, Carrie, this is your item?
Nope. Actually, I'll take this. It's kind of routine for the division.
Sorry.
That's okay. So this is a request for the board to authorize the general manager to hire 2 water conservation specialists, 3s, in the engineering division. We're anticipating a retirement in conservation of a water conservation supervisor. And our intent is to change that position to convert it to a water conservation specialist 3. And then at the same time, increase one of our 1-2 positions to a level 3. And with all of the contracts that we have going on right now for conservation, a water conservation specialist has the ability to do project management and contracting and invoicing and whatnot. So we really feel like this is a good move for the department to have 2 water conservation specialists, 3 positions in the group, and that we'll be able to manage all of the consultant and contracting with turf removal and whatnot that's happening right now with the drought. We don't think there'll be no increase in FTEs with hiring of the 2 positions, and actually there'll be a savings, a net savings of about $12,000 a year by lowering the supervisor position to a 3.
Can I just ask, it seems like you need more capacity given everything we're talking about. I mean, if I just go through all of the recommendations that the board has made tonight, it's a lot more work. Have you given thought, Crystal, to the need to increase capacity in the water conservation department?
Oh, certainly. Yes, we've just recently hired a couple of summer helpers and also interns, and we currently have out for solicitation a proposal to hire a landscape architect to assist us with landscape plan review so we can work on some of these drought efforts, spend more, and have the resources to do that. We also have another solicitation currently out to hire construction inspection services to assist us with all the turf inspections that's going out and measuring the amount of turf that's being removed and the before and after on the removal.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a number. Actually, we'll go into more detail on what's happening in terms of resource allocations at the upcoming Communications and Water Efficiency Committee meeting.
Okay. All right. Any board comments on this item?
No.
Terry, do we have any public comment on this item?
No.
Then I'm looking for, this is an approval item. Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
We need a roll call.
Director Bregman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
President Kohler.
Aye.
Thank you.
This brings us to item 8, the purchase of chemicals.
Yes, good evening, directors. I'll take this one. So this is the purchase of a substitute coagulant chemical. As you may have heard, the chemical market is in somewhat of a turmoil with COVID. And we're told by our supplier that they are unable to meet our demand for ferric chloride. We have spent some time over the past year or so exploring different coagulants and have identified a suitable replacement, ferric sulfate. And we've identified a supplier, Chimera, who have indicated that they are able to meet our demand. So tonight, we're requesting the board authorize the general manager to negotiate and execute a chemical supply contract with Chemira.
Do you know, Paul, what the savings is on the ferric chloride?
So I think I mentioned in the article, in the board item, it was approximately 100,000, but sharpening the pencils, I think it's probably closer to 140 that we might be able to save.
And Paul, is it interchangeable? Is it EPA approved and all that?
It is. It's fully approved. It's got AWWA standards as well as underwriters, and meets the NSF.
NSF, yeah.
For water treatment chemicals.
While we're in this turf, how are we doing with chlorine?
Yeah, so as you probably have heard that there's a bit of a ruckus in the chlorine market, but it turns out.
Yeah, go look at the Home Depot. Zero.
Right.
Zero.
It's interesting. It's largely associated with a couple plant shortages that were shut down at Dow Chemical and a Honeywell plant that were shut down for an undefined period for reasons that I don't have at the tip of my fingers. But that's caused a severe shortage in the chlorine market. It seems to have affected mostly chlorine gas, but there are some other sort of shortages that we're seeing in terms of tablets that you might need for pools and things like that.
Well, we've had to switch our contract operations over from bleach to HTH because we can't buy bleach.
We have not been affected by our supplier for sodium hypochlorite, which is bleach, and used as our primary disinfectant. We've not been affected, and our deliveries have been consistent, and our supplier continues to say that they're able to meet our demand.
Cool.
Yeah. That's an important one.
Yeah, that's a very tricky one.
Okay, is there any further board discussion on this item? Terry, do we have any public comment on this item?
There are no public comments.
Okay, then I'm looking for a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
President Kohler.
Aye.
Thank you.
That brings us to future board meetings, and I have a problem. I am now completely unavailable on August 18th when we're supposed to have the comms meeting that I feel I really do need to be at since I chair that committee. So I'm going to make an unconventional proposal. Since we have the operations committee on Friday, how would the rest of my board members and staff feel if we just switched comms and operations? Because I mean, I'm sorry to miss any meeting, of course, but I think it's less critical that I'm there for operations than for the comms meeting.
I may not be available on the 19th myself.
It's the 18th, Jack.
18th, Jack.
But you wanted to do the switch.
So the comms meeting was going to be the 18th and ops on the 20th. So since they're already on calendar, I'm just suggesting we flip them.
Well,
if we can't,
Jack did indicate to me the issue with him on the 19th.
There is a meeting on the 19th.
Right. We may be moving ops anyway to the following week. I'll be getting back to the board on that. So that does open up that slot, assuming, well, at least we heard from Jack, who may not be able to make that, but other than that, the ops meeting was scheduled. So I do think in that context, it works.
Yeah, and even Ben, if it has to move to the 17th, that'd be okay too, right? Probably. There's probably a day we can find in that week that will work
for the ops meeting. Yeah, because
yes,
certainly we do want President Kohler at the comms and water efficiency.
So I'll be back east both days, but I can make it work on that Friday. I just can't make it work on Wednesday.
Cool. We'll figure it out. We'll get your work your schedule.
Okay. All right. Any other board comment on the future agenda items?
I'm sorry.
Carrie, you know what we can do? We can talk tomorrow at the SLT on the
Thank you.
logistics of the meetings, and
All
we'll
right.
communicate to the board on what we're proposing.
Okay, but also I wanted to bring up, because this is important, it's that board retreat. So, I've sent a couple of emails to remind you that the staff would like to move the operations committee from October 18th to October 15th, which is a Friday. And so I just wanted to double check with you. And I believe I spoke with a couple of you that said you're okay with that, but I haven't heard from the other 3 of you.
You didn't say it right. You want to move the board retreat from the 18th to the 15th.
That's correct. Thank you, sir. Yes.
Oh, I didn't get that. That's what you wanted to do. Sorry.
Yes, sorry. It's late night. I know.
Oh, okay. I can do that.
Yeah,
I
that's
can too.
okay. That's okay for me.
Okay, great. So that's going to be an all-day thing from 9 to 3. And then Director Russell and I will bring you back with proposals for also that ops on October to another date. So hopefully either October 29th or October 22nd, one of those dates, but we'll let you know.
Okay.
All right, so I confirmed it for October 15th, the board retreat. Thank you. And thank you, Director Russell.
Any further board comment on this item? Terry, are there any public comments on this item?
There are none.
Great. I think we are adjourned. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you all.
Good night.
Bye.